So now we're going to have a look at the Switcher LFO. So I've clicked on my 3 groups here that are all LFOs, and we can see them down here. So we've got Switcher LFOs and then a random LFO that we're going to look at next. So the Switcher LFO, or LFOs in general, allow you to create cyclical modulation. So it means you can have modulation which goes in a cycle, and originally it was implemented on synthesizers to allow you to have vibrato and tremolo and effects like that. Now, the interface of the LFO is split into 3 parts. We have the rate section, the shape section here, and then the amp section on the right. Okay, so the rate section allows us to determine the speed of the LFO. Now we have different options here. We can sync to project tempo, and you can see now this slider here becomes beats and bars. We have free, whereas we just have a free rate control. And then we have oscillator. Now this actually creates an oscillator speed LFO, so it's very, very fast modulation. Let's actually route this to something. So we'll bring down the filter cutoff and we'll send the LFO to affect the filter cutoff. So we've got that very, very fast modulation. Free is just a freely running, and then sync. As I said, is synced to the project tempo. Okay, we also have some modes down here. First of all, we have loop. Now this allows us to run the LFO in an infinite loop. And that's regardless of whether a note's played or not, so it's not re-triggered every single time we press a note. And the next one we have is loop restart. So you can hear that has a nice consistent attack, whereas loop doesn't. And the reason is that the LFO is being restarted on every MIDI note. So it's much more punchy and consistent, but sometimes you want things to be a bit more smooth and flowing, in which case you might use loop instead. Next up we have this loop GTE, that's loop gate. Now for this one, as soon as we let go of a key, the LFO is cut. So you can hear we have that little bit of tail that's cut away with loop gate. Okay, so next up we have loop release. Now what I'm going to do is just jump across to the amp envelope and set a long release. And the reason I'm going to do that is because now the LFO is actually triggered on a note off message. So the filter is static until a note off message is received, and then with that long release that we set, we can then hear the modulation taking place. Pretty cool. We then have one shot. Now in this mode only one cycle of the LFO is going to be heard. So we have that attack that's caused by that one cycle of the LFO working on a filter, and then it goes back to being the static filter position. We have one shot release. Now this is the same, but we get a cycle during the release phase. So in this mode, we hear that single shot LFO cycle on a note off message. Again, kind of interesting sound. I'll put it back to the default of loop. Okay, so next up we have this MIDI and remote mode here. Now, when it's on MIDI, it means that the LFO is reset when we're on the reset mode by a MIDI note. When it's on remote, it's going to be reset by the remote octave. Okay, next up we have mono. And when this is deactivated, the LFO is polyphonic, which means that each incoming note receives its own LFO. When it's activated, however, we have a monophonic LFO, and all incoming notes receive the same LFO, regardless of their pitch. much more consistent sounding when we play polyphonically in the mono mode. But in some ways more interesting without the mono mode, so it just depends on what you're going for really. Okay, so next up we have our shape choices from the dial here. So we've got plenty of different kind of LFO sounds to choose from. Let me just bring the release down again. Yeah, so we've got some interesting shapes there to play with. And we have this latch shape option here. Now when this is selected, changes to the shape are latched until the next MIDI note is received. So if you look up here, if I actually put it onto custom, you'll be able to see when a new MIDI note is received. So there's no changes to the shape there because there was no new MIDI note, but if I change the shape and then play a new note, you'll hear the shape will change. That's what that latch shape option does. Okay, so next up we have the LFO level. Now this is like an output level for the LFO. So really it's kind of akin to changing our level here. So you can dial in exactly the amount of modulation you're looking for. Now we have polarity. We can have a bipolar modulator, which means it's going to be going either side of a central point. Unipolar, it's going to just be positive or negative, depending on which way we drag our amount slider there. We have unipolar 0. Now this is similar to the unipolar mode, but it has a slight difference when the oscillator is restarted with a new note trigger. Okay, so next up we have delay, and this delays the onset of the LFO. You can see this little diagram here changing to reflect that. Now we have a way of adjusting the fall and rise of this, so we can make it more gradual or more extreme. So it's kind of like our own little mini envelope that's controlling this. And those are the parameters of our Switcher LFO. Next up we're going to have a look at the random LFO. Thanks for watching.